Can you tell me where you lived before you were 5? The question landed so strangely that I thought I had misheard it. I was sitting across from a state benefits caseworker with my injured shoulder locked in a brace, expecting questions about pay stubs and medical leave. Instead, her manager stood beside the desk, staring at my driver's license as though the photograph belonged to someone else. "I don't know," I said. "I remember our old house, but not before kindergarten." The caseworker slowly turned her monitor away from me. "What's going on?" "We need to pause your application," the manager said. My stomach tightened. Did someone use my social security number? Neither of them answered. The caseworker picked up her phone and spoke so quietly I could not hear the words. That was when a sentence I had spent 14 years trying to forget came back with perfect clarity. "You were never really my son." I was 19 when Gregory Mills said it. My mother had been dead less than 3 months. I came home from a double shift and found my clothes stuffed into a black garbage bag beside the front door. Gregory stood behind it with his arms folded. "You're an adult now," he said. "I'm paying rent. You're taking up space." When I asked where I was supposed to go, he pushed the bag toward me with his shoe. "You were never really my son, Ethan. Nobody wants you. Nobody is coming to get you." I believed him. Growing up, Gregory's biological children received birthday parties, school photos on the walls, and help buying their first cars. I got chores, secondhand clothes, and warnings not to be ungrateful. My mother tried to soften it, but whenever I asked about my birth certificate, baby pictures, or the years before I could remember, she always said we would talk later. Then she died before later came. Back in the benefits office, 2 people wearing state identification badges entered the room. One introduced herself as an investigator and asked to see my license. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we need you to come with us for additional verification." Am I in trouble? No. Then tell me why everyone is acting like I'm not supposed to exist. She glanced at her partner, then lowered her voice. "Has anyone ever told you that you might be a missing child?" The investigator led me into a private interview room on the 2nd floor of the building. There was a metal table, 3 chairs, and a box of tissues placed too carefully in the center. She sat across from me. "What is your earliest clear memory?" I stared at the blank wall behind her. A yellow kitchen, my mother making pancakes. I was maybe 5. Anything before that? Nothing I trust. Her partner opened a folder. "Do you have any scars from childhood?" I showed them a thin mark near my hairline. My mother had always said I fell from a porch step, but she never remembered which house it happened at. They asked about baby photographs, hospital records, and relatives. Each question exposed another empty space. "There weren't many pictures," I said. Gregory hated when I asked. "What did he do?" I remembered being 14 and finding a loose stack of papers inside an old photo album. One page had a different last name handwritten across the top. Before I could read more, Gregory snatched the album from me. That night, I watched from the hallway as he fed several papers into the fireplace. When I confronted him, he said, "Old junk. Stop digging into things that don't concern you." The investigator leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell your mother?" I tried. She looked frightened and told me we'd discuss it later. Later never came. They explained that several state records connected to my identity did not align. A DNA sample could confirm whether the alert was legitimate. "What happens if it is?" I asked. "Then we reopen a 29-year-old missing child case." My hands tightened around the edge of the table. Part of me wanted the test to be wrong. Another part wanted Gregory's words finally explained. Before I left, the investigator asked, "Is your stepfather still alive?" "Yes." She and her partner exchanged a look. Then she closed the folder. "We need to speak with him before he destroys anything else." By the following afternoon, the investigation was no longer confined to quiet interview rooms. 2 unmarked state vehicles and a sheriff's cruiser pulled into Gregory Mills's driveway just after 9 in the morning. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Curtains shifted. Within minutes, half the street was watching. I arrived only because the lead investigator had called and asked if I could identify anything they found inside the house. I hadn't been back since Gregory threw me out 14 years earlier. Gregory opened the front door before anyone knocked. "What is this?" he demanded. The detective handed him a warrant. "We're executing a search related to historical identity records." Gregory barely glanced at it before throwing his hands into the air. "This is ridiculous. My worthless stepson is trying to steal money from me." Several neighbors turned toward me. "There he is," Gregory shouted, pointing directly at me. "He disappears for years, then comes back looking for a payday." I didn't answer. The detective stepped between us. "Mr. Mills, we're not discussing finances. Please step aside." Gregory's face reddened. "I told him years ago the truth. He was never my son. End of story." His words stung less than they once had. For the first time, I realized he wasn't saying them to hurt me. He was saying them to protect himself. Investigators began opening filing cabinets, storage boxes, and an old locked trunk in the basement. One deputy carried out several dusty banker boxes and placed them beside the patrol vehicle. Then another investigator emerged, holding a faded accordion folder sealed with brittle tape. "I think you need to see this." Inside were adoption records. Not just mine. There were handwritten notes, correspondence with state agencies, and yellowed newspaper clippings. One clipping stopped me cold. Across the top was a photograph of a little boy who looked hauntingly familiar despite the grainy print. The headline read, "4-year-old boy, still missing after county fair disappearance." Gregory's confidence vanished. "Those don't prove anything," he snapped. A voice came from across the street. "I always wondered about those papers." Everyone turned. Mrs. Holloway, an elderly neighbor who had lived there longer than anyone else, slowly walked toward the detectives. "Whenever someone asked Ethan about his childhood," she said, "Gregory would shut the conversation down. He once told me never to mention the years before kindergarten around that boy." The detective carefully placed the newspaper clipping into an evidence sleeve. He looked directly at Gregory. "You intentionally kept this?" Gregory looked away. For the first time in my life, I saw him unable to control the room. The lead investigator spoke quietly into her radio before nodding to another detective. "Mr. Mills, you're coming with us for questioning." As deputies escorted Gregory toward the cruiser, he twisted around to glare at me. "You don't know what you're doing." Before I could respond, another detective hurried across the yard holding a sealed envelope. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Carter." He paused just long enough for every person on the street to fall silent. "Your DNA results just came back." The detective didn't open the envelope in Gregory's front yard. Instead, he asked me to ride back to the state investigative office. During the drive, nobody spoke much. The silence felt heavier than any conversation. Every mile seemed to pull me farther away from the life I thought I understood. Inside the conference room, the lead investigator spread several files across the table. "Our laboratory completed the expedited comparison," she said. "Your DNA does not match the family that raised you." Even though I had expected those words, hearing them out loud felt unreal. She slid another document toward me. "But it does match preserved DNA from relatives connected to a missing child investigation that began 29 years ago." I lowered my head, trying to absorb what she had just said. "So, I really was that child?" She nodded. "We're now reconstructing exactly what happened." Over the next hour, investigators pieced together the timeline. 29 years earlier, a crowded county fair had turned into chaos when a 4-year-old boy disappeared. Witnesses believed he had wandered away during the evening rush. Emergency responders searched through the night before placing an unidentified child found nearby into temporary protective care. Because of overlapping reports, incomplete paperwork, and a clerical recording error, the child entered the system under incorrect identifying information. The mistake was never caught before the adoption process moved forward. My adoptive mother had legally adopted me, believing every requirement had been completed correctly. The investigator looked directly at me. "We have found no evidence that your adoptive mother knowingly participated in any deception." I felt an unexpected wave of relief. She had loved me. Whatever happened, she hadn't caused it. The lead detective continued. "Years later, Gregory Mills married your adoptive mother. After she passed away, Gregory sorted through her personal records. Among them were letters from state agencies, adoption correspondence, and documentation showing inconsistencies between your adoption file and your earliest records. He discovered enough information to realize your identity might be wrong. I stared at him. He knew. He knew there were serious inconsistencies, and he never told anyone. The detective slowly shook his head. Instead, he concealed the documents. Another investigator explained why. If your identity had been corrected years ago, investigators would have reviewed survivor benefits, estate distributions, and financial accounts connected to your legal status. Gregory had a strong incentive to make sure no one reopened those files. Suddenly, everything fit together. The burned papers, the missing photographs, his anger whenever I asked questions, his determination to convince me nobody wanted me. None of it had been random. It had all protected a secret. By late afternoon, detectives informed me that criminal charges were being prepared, involving evidence concealment, fraud, and obstruction connected to the investigation. Then the lead investigator received another call. She smiled for the first time since we had met. "We've located your closest surviving biological relative." My heart began racing. "Who?" "Your mother's younger sister." A few minutes later, I was escorted into another conference room. An elderly woman slowly stood as I entered. Her hands trembled so badly she had to grip the back of her chair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She studied my face as though searching for someone she had loved decades ago. Then tears filled her eyes. Barely above a whisper, she said, "I've. The room fell completely silent. The elderly woman took one cautious step toward me before stopping, as though she was afraid I might disappear again if she moved too quickly. "My name is Margaret," she said through tears. "I'm your mother's sister." I wanted to answer, but nothing came out. She opened an old leather folder she had carried into the room. Inside were dozens of photographs. She slid the first one across the table. It showed a smiling young woman kneeling beside a little boy with dark hair, both holding oversized cotton candy at a county fair. The little boy was wearing the same thin scar above his right eyebrow that I had shown investigators only hours earlier. My hand instinctively touched my forehead. Margaret smiled through tears. "Your mother always called that your lucky scar." Another photograph showed the same child blowing out 4 birthday candles, then another, then another. For the first time in my life, I was looking at pictures of myself as a small child. I whispered, "I thought nobody had pictures of me." Margaret shook her head. "We had hundreds." She explained that 29 years earlier, the family had gone together to the annual county fair. During the evening crowd, I had wandered away after chasing a balloon vendor. Within minutes, panic spread across the fairgrounds. Police searched through the night. Volunteers combed nearby woods. News stations aired my photograph for weeks. My biological parents never stopped searching. My father died years later without knowing what had happened to his son. My mother kept my bedroom exactly as I had left it until cancer claimed her life. Margaret reached into the folder again. "This was written by your mother." She handed me a folded letter. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to anyone who might someday find me. In it, she described my laugh, my favorite bedtime story, and the tiny birthmark hidden beneath my left shoulder blade. Only family could have known those details. The investigator quietly confirmed what the DNA already proved. "There is no remaining doubt. Margaret is your biological aunt." I covered my face as years of questions finally collapsed into one overwhelming truth. Gregory had been wrong. Someone had wanted me. Someone had searched for me. Someone had loved me every single day I was gone. Over the following weeks, investigators completed the timeline that had stolen nearly 3 decades from my life. The county fair disappearance had triggered one of the largest local searches at the time. During the confusion, I was located by emergency responders but was unable to provide accurate identifying information because of my age and shock. A series of administrative mistakes caused my temporary records to become separated from the active missing child investigation. By the time the errors were discovered, the trail had gone cold. My adoptive mother legally adopted me, believing every document she received was legitimate. She raised me with genuine love and never intentionally hid my past. Years later, after marrying Gregory, she apparently noticed inconsistencies in my paperwork and contacted state offices for clarification. Before she ever received complete answers, she became ill. After her death, Gregory inherited her records. Investigators discovered unopened correspondence, agency notices, and archived documents showing that questions about my identity had been raised years earlier. Instead of reporting them, Gregory locked them away. His reason was painfully simple. Correcting my identity would have triggered reviews of survivor benefits, estate distributions, and financial accounts connected to my legal status after my mother's death. Gregory had continued controlling those assets for years. The investigators concluded he knowingly concealed evidence that could have reopened my case. Criminal charges followed for evidence concealment, fraud, and obstruction related to the investigation. The news spread quickly through the community. Neighbors who had believed Gregory's story, that I was an ungrateful stepson who abandoned the family, learned the truth. Several apologized to me personally. Mrs. Holloway hugged me and said, "I always knew something wasn't right." Gregory's biological children struggled to accept what investigators uncovered. Some defended him at first, but the recovered documents and financial records left little room for denial. The man who had spent years telling everyone I was unwanted lost the trust of nearly everyone around him. Meanwhile, my life was moving in an entirely different direction. Margaret introduced me to cousins I had never known existed. Together we visited my biological parents' graves. She placed fresh flowers beside my mother's headstone and whispered, "We found him." Standing there, I finally understood something that had haunted me since I was 19. Gregory never threw me out because I was unworthy. He threw me out because the truth had always threatened the life he built. Months later, the court approved the restoration of my original birth identity. Even so, I made one personal decision. I kept Carter as my middle name. My adoptive mother had not created the lie that stole my childhood. She had loved me, protected me, and given me the best life she knew how to provide. I wanted part of her to remain with me forever. After returning to work, I began volunteering with organizations that assist families searching for missing children and adults separated by historical record errors. Every time I met another family still hoping for answers, I remembered how close mine had come to never finding them. Sometimes people ask whether I hate Gregory. I don't. Hatred would keep him connected to my future. The truth already did everything justice required. He lost his reputation, his freedom, and the story he had controlled for decades. I gained something infinitely greater: a name, a family, a past that finally made sense. And the man who spent his childhood believing nobody had ever searched for him walked away knowing an entire family had never stopped looking.